With Johnson once again back to writing his, or at least supposedly, from what we have heard, supposedly writing once again his columns for, in this case, the Daily Mail. Ultimately, who knows where he will end up writing columns or wherever he will choose to do so. He is, of course, back writing, and that gives us an interesting opportunity to be able to respond to Boris Johnson's drivel that he has been putting out into the press at this point. And what has he been doing today? Well, he has written in the Daily Mail that we will never, repeat, never rejoin the EU, and that it is not an answer to any of the UK's problems. To which I say, it's not an answer to our problems. The UK government has just had to bribe a car manufacturer down south to make them stay. It has had to give them investment, meaning that British taxpayers' money is going to be invested into a car plant, and they are going to reap all the profit from that deal. This isn't the first time that a conservative pro-Brexit government has had to bribe a company by giving them inward investment to which they reap all the profit. I want to stress that they reap all the profit. We get nothing in return except they stay. They don't leave, they stay. That is what they have done before. That is what they've done in the past. And I've always said this. This is what the UK government is going to have to do. Any big company or corporation can just threaten to leave, and if the government doesn't give them any investment, well, they'll leave, they'll downsize. And why? Because we've said it from day one. Brexit has made the UK an unattractive place to do business. When you've got the EU and the Eurozone and the single market and customs union sitting on our doorstep, why come here? And yet, this is what Boris has written about also today, that we've got to sell all these benefits of Brexit. Well, I say this now. Johnson was prime minister. He should have been selling the benefits of Brexit himself. He even made the office of Brexit benefits, which couldn't come up with any Brexit benefits. But maybe today we might hear some, quote, Brexit benefits. But we'll see what Johnson has. So we're not going to be starting at the beginning, because he talks, of course, about Horizon and the whole reason about leaving it, rejoining it, and it's a good thing. See, we can cooperate with the Europeans. But he's shown no interest in cooperating with the Europeans, especially when he was prime minister, even including his government. Remember, this was his government who expressly said it was not interested in talking with the EU until at least the end of 2022. So much for, work and cooperation. And we've already been through the fact that us being out of Horizon because of Boris Johnson has caused unbelievable damage to the UK's research and science areas. But let's go digging into this then, and let's see what benefits Boris says about we should be crowing about the benefits of Brexit and why we will, quote, never rejoin the EU. So, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel. Like I say, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and our off-stage link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, there is the link to the Pony Club as well down below. And of course, the YouTube thank you button. So let's go diving into this. This is interesting. Like I say, from the Daily Mail, we'll start halfway through. So like I said, at the beginning, he talks about Horizon, even though it's his whole fault. The UK got kicked out of it in the first place. The Horizon scheme is a EU scheme. They are the ones in control of it. And because we were making demands, they went, well, okay, if you're going to make demands of us, you can't be a part of Horizon anymore. And then he calls it a petty decision. But anyway, we joined halfway through. Because obviously lots of people, and especially the Brexiteers, have been talking about how the fact that this is a big sign that we're just on our way back to rejoining the EU, and that rejoining things like Horizon, etc., is just part of that journey. And I've said very much so. It is, because the more we do these cooperation things and things like that, the less people start to realize, well, why did we do Brexit in the first place? If this cooperation is proving so good, then why don't we cooperate with them even more further? So this is where we start. So he starts off with, it is fascinating to see how this sensible development, on which I congratulate the government, has excited the glands of those who always opposed Brexit. You see, they are saying, it's the beginning of the end for this whole crazy experiment. We are gradually going back in, they say. First, it was the Windsor Framework, which locks Northern Ireland into parts of the single market and therefore makes it more difficult for the rest of the UK to diverge from EU law. That's very true, but also Boris's own withdrawal deal has provisions, the level playing field provisions. Has he forgotten about that? I highly suspect he has. And of course, we are now back in Horizon, he continues to say. It may be relatively trivial. It's not trivial at all. It is huge. A huge section of our research potential. The idea of calling something like Horizon trivial when it is so important to our research and tech sectors, it's not trivial. It's not trivial or trivial. It's not trivial in any way. But he continues. But it's a signal, they say, a message about the direction of travel of things to come. And it indeed is a direction of travel of things to come. I agree with him on that. Then he continues, soon, they hope, there will be a Labour government. And Keir Starmer will take us back into the single market and customs union, or at least back into the regulatory orbit. And to be honest, single market and customs union, probably not yet, but back into a regulatory orbit, back into agreeing with things that remove trade barriers, which, as we said, if you remove trade barriers by signing alignment deals, then why aren't we in the single market customs union? And this was always going to be the undoing of the Brexiteers. The more you have this alignment, the more people realize, well, actually, working with the EU and being in the single market customs union was always good for business, and provided us with so much. Why did we leave it in the first place? That's what we've seen happening. People realizing the mess of Brexit, what it has done to business. That's why you've seen a massive turn against Brexit. Those soft Brexiteers, which Boris Johnson managed to win over by saying that, oh yeah, we're not going to leave the single market and customs union. Well, guess what? We did. And now those soft Brexiteers are seeing the damage because they were promised that if you vote for leave, there's going to be no economic harm whatsoever. It's not turned out to be the case. And just like prohibition, the soft dries are now starting to see the problems that came with prohibition. So he continues. Soon the UK will be back on bended knee, pleading to obey the rules of the club. Again, nice use of language there, I see. But again, you can see that the language that Boris Johnson uses, it's very obvious the way in which he's using this that language particularly. So even if we are not yet full members, I saw the former chairman of the Remain campaign, the Amiable Stuart Rose, who was on the airwaves the other day prophesying that Britain would return to the EU. Well, I'm here to tell you and Lord Rose that that isn't going to happen, ever. To rejoin the EU would mean, according to EU rules, that we would have to scrap the pound. Not necessarily. There are still countries in the EU that still have their own currency. That is heavily negotiable. And that is not true that we would have to scrap the pound. Now, if we did, it's not the end of the world. If we do have to scrap the pound, that is eminently doable. And I think people will do it. It is not the end of the world. Sign up to the euro, and of course, abandon national control of monetary and logically fiscal policy as well. Absolutely, we would not lose control of fiscal policy. That is a complete lie. Germany has control of their own fiscal policies. Belgium does. France does. We have control over our own fiscal policy. All that would happen is that the monetary control that the Bank of England has would essentially get transferred to the European Central Bank. That is basically it. It's not the end of the world. And of course, we would be part of the euro, which would be, to be honest, fantastic from a travel point of view, because we no longer have to mess about changing money. Not only that, the power that the euro actually has when 20% of the world's reserve currency is in euros, that gives the UK a lot of economic power because it would be part of, once again, of the larger EU, which gives it a more voice and a more say in the world. We've just seen the highly embarrassing James Cleverly visit to China. As we said back then, why is China going to listen to us? It's not going to listen to us at all. It was oh, hi, welcome. Okay, bye. God, that was fun. That's what China's reaction was. It was such an embarrassment for us as the UK, and a complete embarrassment for global Britain. You just had the G20, where we've got the massive new announcement of one of the biggest international trade infrastructure projects being built. We're not part of that because we're not in the EU. Rishi Sunak was nowhere near that deal. Hardly a glowing endorsement for global Britain. But he continues, this is simply never going to happen. Not true. To rejoin the EU would mean paying even more to Brussels than we were before. No, it doesn't. And signing up to the goal of a federal Europe. Still not on the cards. There are people, of course, in the EU that want to go in the direction, but it is nowhere near the point of happening at the moment. Maybe at some point in the future, maybe, but federal Europe is not the worst thing in the world to be a part of. No British government would ever accept it. I, again, highly doubt it. And rejoining the EU is not the solution for any significant problem the UK currently faces. Well, neither was Brexit, Boris. Neither was Brexit. But that's what you and your Brexiteers claim, that the Brexit was going to be the solution for all our problems. It's not. We've lost a huge portion of our economy permanently because of Brexit. That means less tax revenue. That is a lot of problems. We've now having to bribe companies, as we've seen from recently from the car manufacturer that we've just had to chuck a load of money to get them to stay here in the UK. That's the Brexit is causing problems. And sooner or later, politicians are going to have to face up to the fact that Brexit is the elephant in the room. That if you want to talk about the UK economy properly and solving the UK's problems, well, you've got to talk about Brexit, and you've got to talk about honestly about the problems that it has caused. And that's one of the big problems that we don't have, especially in the current government. I think next Parliament, the fact that if the Conservatives are going to lose, as we can see, a lot of the seats they're going to lose, there's going to be a lot less Brexiteers in Parliament. A lot less Brexiteers. That means you will probably have more open and honest conversations about Brexit in Parliament, which will be good. But anyway, he continues. It will not make the UK more competitive. It absolutely will make the UK more competitive because we'll be part of the single market again. But there you go. Rejoining the EU will also not solve our productivity problems. Again, right on that. But neither did Brexit solve any of our productivity problems either. It will also not help us tackle the skills gap or fix the housing market or help us cut the absurd cost of infrastructure in this country. Well, actually, it might do, because rejoining the single market and customs union would help ease the supply lines a lot more. So that would actually help probably cut the price of infrastructure, especially when you're talking about the transportation of building materials. The skills gap and the housing market, well, that's always been a UK government problem, even when we were members of the EU. Remember, those problems, oh, yes, don't worry, we'll do Brexit. We'll solve those problems. Coming from the guy who was, again, an ex-prime minister who could have solved those two problems and did nothing about those problems. So, on the contrary, it would make things worse, depriving us of regulatory freedom before we have had even the chance to use it. Of course, what do they mean by regulatory freedom? They mean what we have seen. We have seen the Tories strip wholesale environmental regulations. When we have seen the seas get worse, the beaches get worse, our environment get worse, the rivers get worse. And that's just the environmental protections for those. What do you think are going to happen to the other, quote, regulatory freedoms that are going to go? So Rishi Sunak hailed the, quote, right deal for the country as Britain rejoined the Horizon project. I said it a few weeks ago, but I will say it again. Look at the difference. Here we are, the growth rates. Look at the difference between growth rates between Europe and the United States economies that used to be roughly equal in size. In the past 15 years, the US, with over 100 million fewer people, has overtaken the EU so fast that the American GDP is now 50% bigger than the whole of the Eurozone. Again, fact checked, please. I don't think that's necessarily true. Like I say, this is Boris Johnson. I think him stating fact and figures, you should instantly be highly skeptical of any fact and figures he throws out. I don't necessarily believe that is 100% true. And if there is, then as we always saw with the Brexiteers back then, when they used to claim something very similar back in 2016, why on earth are they using sort of these figures? When you dig into these figures deeper, there are a lot bigger problems going on between, like, United States and Europe. And of course, Europe's having problems at the moment. That is undeniable. But I'll tell you what, they're a damn sight better off than we are. So, why would we want to reshackle ourselves to a model that is so manifestly failing? Yes, the whole Eurozone, Europe, it's failing. The EU is failing. No matter that, again, still singing that same tune. Europe is failing. Europe is failing. No, it's never failing. Once again, the chime that the Brexiteers always used to go through, or the Eurosceptics, that the EU is about to fall. The EU is about to fall. Still not fallen. So he continues. The other day, I was in San Pablo, where I talked to the governor of the state, Teosco de Fartes. He seemed to be highly popular and successful. He had a dynamic and free market agenda. He wanted to emulate the UK's privatization experiment. Our advice, don't. Don't. He wanted to do a free trade deal with us. Wow. How small is San Pablo? What would we actually get from that trade deal? I don't think it would be massively, hugely popular. Trosso told me he was a big fan of Brexit and sees a massive potential for the UK-Brazil relationship, and he is right. Probably for Brazil, yes, but not for us. Because what can we offer to Brazil? We've said this before, that the Brexiteers like Boris Johnson do not understand these whole things of, oh, if we attach ourselves to places like Brazil, it's a developing economy. Look how much their line is going up. Surely we can profit from that. No, it's because they're a developing economy. Eventually, their line will peter out. It will flatten. A lot of people are saying this at the moment. Why you have places like America and even in Europe, why our growth is so slow is because we have just reached that natural plateau. But these free market fundamentalists are obsessed with one thing and one thing alone: line go up. If the line isn't going up, then that's the problem, and it is regulation, etc., etc. Pick your free market fundamentalist talking point, but there are other ways to tell the health of an economy. The eurozone was an incredibly healthy economy. It still is an incredibly healthy economy. Growth is not the be all and end all of an economy. There's far more stuff going on, but of course the Brexiteers are obsessed with that. And Brazil is a developing economy. What are we going to sell to Brazil? We are a service-based economy. We sell services. That is what we do. And Brazil does not have the infrastructure or the economy to buy our service, or to at least buy into our service economy. Now, in terms of manufacturing and goods, excellent. Brazil will send everything towards the UK, but then what happens to our own manufacturing base, as we've talked about before? You talk to a lot of Brexiteers. They wanted less globalization, not more of it, Boris. So he continues, we need to remember, and yes, this Brexit government needs to remind the world what Brexit has already done. Yes, it was because we were out of the EU that the UK felt able to go. Here he goes again. This old chestnut. To go faster than the European medical agencies, so that it was the first country in the world to put a licensed and effective COVID vaccine into someone's arm. I think it was technically for speed wise, but no, not 100% true. We saw that when all these other countries caught up, not only did they outproduce, but they outpaced us in the terms of speed of vaccinations. Yes, it was because we were out of the EU that we were able to risk the wrath of our partners and do the quote far-sighted AUKUS defense pact with the United States and Australia. Yeah. Why would you risk the wrath of your partners by doing that? That was not like AUKUS was not a sensible deal. You only annoyed France. And I think that was the pure objective, just to annoy France. And to be honest, there's a fantastic book called A Thousand Years of Annoying the French. And if you're in French, I believe it's called A Thousand Years of Annoying the English. This is just another part of that tit for tat that Boris Johnson likes to do. AUKUS, we did not really bear the fruits of that. The only two people that really bared the fruits of that were United States and Australia. Why? Because we're not in the Pacific. Because it gives submarines to Australia to help them in the Pacific against China, which is what the US wants. We are not in the Pacific, as we've explained thousands of times when it has come to discussing the Pacific Partnership deal. And yes, because we are outside the EU, that we were able to take the lead in backing Ukraine with military support. The EU has got nothing to do with that. That's nothing. That's absolutely nothing to do. Backing Ukraine has nothing to do with that. A foreign policy area that we have had mysteriously subcontracted while in the EU to France and Germany. No. The EU does not have a single foreign policy. That is left up to its own individual nation states. So that is an absolute outright lie. But of course, Boris Johnson. And it's thanks to the proper Brexit delivery that with such a huge effort by this Conservative government that we are now able to do things differently in the fields from finance to bioscience. The finance I'm supposed is referring to is the Edinburgh reforms. As we've said before, that is like taking the seatbelt off your car. And the seatbelt is a safety feature. Sooner or later, you will get into an accident or someone else will cause an accident and you will be in it and you will not have seatbelts to protect you. That is what we are doing. We are riding around in a car with no seatbelts. That is what Rishi Sunak has done in that area. In bioscience, I don't even know what technically is done in that regard, but I suppose he's probably referring to the vaccines. Um, we've done something brave and remarkable and right, and we need to talk it up, explain it, champion it, not somehow give the impression that we are embarrassed by the decision of the British people. Um, they absolutely are embarrassed because it has diminished Britain's place in the world. Again, this idea of global Britain, complete and utter absolute fantasy, was proved by the absolute humiliating China visit, the G20 trade announcement. Britain's not even involved in one of the biggest trade infrastructure projects in the world. So, time after time, our Olympians show the world that we excel in all sorts of sport. Congratulations, but that doesn't really count for much, to be honest. Cycling, swimming, sprinting, you name it. With a population of only 0.48% of the world, we come behind only America or China in the table in the table of medals. How does being good at sport help your economy? Help bring investment into here? Solve the housing crisis? Did what? Uh, but there is one sport which we are all currently all around global champions, and that is running ourselves down. Of course, this is where we need to be. Boris saying we need to be more boosterism. Uh, yeah, it doesn't matter. You can deny reality all you want, but unfortunately, as we've always said, reality always comes knocking. And of course, we can continue to partner with our EU friends in science and all kinds of other things. But we took the decision to leave the EU, and there is no going back. Not true at all. We can always decide to go back. No parliament is ever tied by a decision of a previous parliament or even referendums. So that's up to a future government to take that decision. Not even the British people can stop that if they want to do that. We have it in our hands to make it a triumphant success. So let's get on with it. Well, why didn't you make it a triumphant success, Boris? You were the prime minister at that time. We had a full Brexit government. When Liz Truss came in to do many of these free market fundamentalist ideas, she lasted less than a month and almost crashed the UK economy, destroying the UK pensions industry, which, if that would have happened, would have had colossal ripple effects. If you think things are bad now for the UK, economically, imagine what would have happened if the UK pensions industry had crashed, which has huge investments all over the British economy. Things could have been infinitely worse. And I want to remind you, that was only a mini budget. Imagine what had happened if that was an actual proper budget. Brexit hasn't been positive for the UK. It has only been a continuing series of disasters after disasters, showing that all the promises of global Britain, how amazing it is going to be, we're going to be out there buccaneering on the world, telling China what to do. They've looked back to us and just ignored us. The recent visit we had was humiliating. We've signed trade deals that have not benefited the UK one bit. And if anything, the New Zealand Australian deal, that's going to hugely destroy British farming. You've got trade deals potentially coming online with the Pacific Partnership, which could undermine drastically British manufacturing. So that's global Britain. Leveling up, you hardly competed with. You mentioned about solving the housing crisis. You were prime minister. Why didn't you try and solve the housing crisis? you know, Brexit and the EU had nothing to do with that. That was an entirely UK government policy and a conservative government policy, I want to point out, of letting the private companies do that. But that's Boris Johnson's um, boosterism that he's trying to inject. And I think very, very much so. He recognizes, just as all these Brexiteers are doing, the more we sign and align with the EU, the more people will start to realize, well, what was the point of Brexit? What was the point of it? If doing deals eases these things, then why aren't we in the single market customs union? Why aren't we full EU members? Why don't we just say, screw it, let's just join the euro? It's going to happen eventually, sooner or later. This we will rejoin the EU. It's just a matter of time. You've got people, I think, saying, 10 years at the moment. That's, I think, optimistic, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible. And I think the way that you see the polls going of the British public reacting to Brexit, how bad it has been, yeah, doesn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me if 10 years turns out to be true. But as always, like I say, we'll see. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.